All right, we are starting the Thursday, March 18th meeting of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee for Westborough, pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law and the governor's March 15th order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place. This meeting of the Westborough Diversity and Inclusion Committee will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public or parties with a right or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the Town of Westborough's website at www.town.westborough.ma.us. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch the meeting may do so in the following manner. You may watch live on www.youtube.com/Westborough TV or on Westborough TV, Verizon Channel 28 or Charter Channel 192. Or you may watch a recorded version on the website westboroughtv.org under the Government tab, Meetings on Demand. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort is being made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means, via Westborough TV. And in the event that we are unable to do so, despite our best efforts, we will post on the Town of Westborough's website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. For the public to contribute to the discussion on these meetings, you are encouraged to send an email to the email address diversity@town.westborough.ma.us or call me as the chairperson, Kara Presley, at 508-366-3090. Hi, everyone. It's nice to see you. Thank you for being here today. Alma cannot be here. May I have a volunteer to take minutes? I think Rana's mouth is moving.
Yeah, I'll do it again.
Thanks, Rana. You're really good at it.
I will.
And I appreciate you're really good at it. And I appreciate
Thank you so much.
I wrote them for last month. We'll review a whole bunch of minutes next month. That's gonna be top of the agenda.
And Rana, I'm happy to, I usually take notes. So if once you have a draft, I'm happy to take a quick look if you'd like.
I'm sure I will.
And Kim does have to leave us at 4 o'clock today, but we have plenty of folks to continue. So thank you. I just want to review the agenda really quickly. I want to very briefly touch base about the goals that are on the annual report that I wrote for 2020, just because we haven't really acknowledged those yet. And I just want to put it out there. And then I want to spend a good chunk of time reflecting on last month's meeting because it was full, very, very full. And so actually the next two agenda items, both reflecting on the meeting and in discussing resources to respond to hate violence, are both in follow-up to last month's meeting. So that's where we'll spend most of our time today. I do hope that we'll have time to check in about language access, improving language access. I am hoping that we have time to talk about promotion of our committee via social media. And then, as always, just touch on some announcements and community issues. All right. Okay, so just, I'm thinking in responding to reflecting on last month's meeting, there's so much I know I have in my mind that we could talk about, and I'm not going to direct the conversation, but just to kind of pinpoint the items that are kind of were at the forefront, debriefing or reflecting on the presentation by the YMCA and what that might mean for our relationship with them, reflecting on the report from the superintendent and assistant superintendent about the race survey, the survey on racism that was distributed throughout the district, touch base about the master plan. And I think it's really important to give some attention to Ryan's statement about the rise in anti-Asian hate violence, and anyone who's paying any attention to the news right now knows that this is unfortunately becoming a larger conversation in mainstream media, though it certainly isn't because it's a new occurrence. So those are the things. And then what do we do in response to all the stuff we learned, if anything? So I'm going to let you all start the conversation, and I'll direct us as needed. Sarah?
Well, I was a part of the professional development that happened in response to the survey that went out to our families in town from the superintendent. I did attend all 3 of them just so that I had an idea of what they were. They were all really excellent. But I did want to bring one back to our attention because I know that we had talked about things that we might be able to provide for the town to take as well for some professional development. There was one brought to us called the TMI Project. Their website is tmiproject.org. They are basically a storytelling professional development where they have people come in and tell their stories. Oh, hold on.
School announcements.
Yeah, that's going to happen quite frequently. Sorry. But it was all about racial, gender, LGBTQI, mental health. And we had 2 really awesome guest speakers come and kind of open our minds to situations that they had been in. And the goal is they give you some writing prompts. And maybe I should have gone later. And but as a privileged white person, I was kind of worried about oh, I'm not going to have anything to write about, and I kind of got worried. But I actually myself had a lot of things that I could write about as well. So I think that it is a good place to start for people because their brain starts thinking about that they've experienced or things that they've seen, and so I did want to recommend that as something that might be something we could look into, because it was very powerful and I enjoyed it a lot.
Can you explain it a little bit more? I don't quite understand.
So basically they had 2 guest speakers come and they told us a story about a time that they had been either in a position that was uncomfortable or something that they had seen or something they had heard about. And the first one we heard was about a racist situation that the person had been involved in and how they took it. But hearing the stories from their point of view was very powerful. I think we can read a lot and, look things up on the internet, but hearing it actually coming from someone's mouth was very moving. The second one was about mental health and being your authentic self, which was really awesome to hear as well. And then they guide you through writing your own story about something that you've seen or something that has happened to you. And you have the opportunity to either share it if you're comfortable or not. But I think it's a good spot to start working on yourself, which is always the first step.
Thank you.
That sounds great. And I think as we think about training for town staff and committees, that could be a resource that we consider. I know that Rana gave feedback during the presentation that Jeff Liberte gave. And I just wanted to follow up on that. Rana's feedback was about the video that Jeff showed, which is one that has been rolling around on social media for many years. And I had seen it before, but hadn't thought about it prior. I knew Jeff was going to show it, but I didn't really think about it. I just was like, okay, whatever. But I wish I had. And in listening to your feedback, Rana, and then considering further myself, I wanted to share with you that I had a really lovely follow-up conversation with Jeff, just debriefing about his impressions of the meeting and giving him feedback about that video. And one of the things that I wanted to point out about the video, who was not here? Well, Shelby wasn't here, but I know you watched it, Shelby, right? And I think Kim, you did too. So is the thing that Rana pointed out that I think was important for us to note is that while it's a powerful example of recognizing privilege and white privilege in particular for those people who were stepping forward in that exercise, that it also maybe unintentionally put a spotlight on those who were left at the starting line, and those who, in the case of this particular video, mostly had brown and black faces. And there was a sense of like, my word, voyeurism of like seeing somebody for their stories that were told by default that they maybe didn't choose to bring to the public for view. And that I think that not a lot of people look at that video from that angle. And I think that was important for us. I mean, I think that was really thoughtful, Rana, for you to bring to light. With my mental health hat on as a mental health professional, I also always think about the kind of traumatic stirring that can be caused by that kind of exposure and those kinds of questions being asked, and how emotionally dysregulating it can be for folks to be put in a position like that. So while I think that there is an educational value for certain people with that video that is incredibly powerful, it also, the exercise and the way it was portrayed can also be kind of exposing and potentially traumatizing and kind of create a sense of kind of voyeurism that I think can be damaging. So I just wanted to put that out there. I said that to Jeff. He was very responsive. He appreciated the feedback. It's not feedback that had been given to him. And so I don't know how he'll take that into consideration, but I just wanted you to know that that conversation was an important one.
So I discussed this afterwards with primarily members of my family who are very into issues of social justice and have gone to what we call comic camp, where they've done all sorts of issues of social justice, etc. And a suggestion was made by either my daughter or my son-in-law, I'm not quite sure, about how you can do such things, but not by using the group that's suffering as the group. You can give them, they can be, other people can pretend to be a person who doesn't have a parent or who is living in the poverty level or something like that. You don't have to isolate those poor kids who, it was so painful. It was horrifically painful to see these children they're the ones who are isolated. Not only do they suffer because they have less in many ways, but then they're being isolated and socially. It was, anyway, I'm not going to continue, but I know that there are ways to achieve the same effect by not making people feel badly about who they are. That was what was terrible to me, was making people feel badly who they are. On others' backs. So, oh, I'm great because I have everything, right? But so that was my point. And I just want to say one more thing, actually. And Ryan, I particularly empathize with so much of what you're going through. And I think about these things, and I would imagine that you all know that I'm Jewish. I have never suffered for being Jewish at all, but it's always so ingrained in my being. The fact that I am part of a minority that's had to fight for itself continuously and continuously and continuously, so that my ability to empathize is I think is very deep. And so with such an issue like that also, and I just wanted to point that out, where we all, it's so curious, we all have so much in common in so many different ways that we're not even aware.
Thank you, Rana. Shelby?
Yeah, so Ron, I think hopefully everyone saw my email following, and I had shared some thoughts. So I had the same, well, I don't want to assume I had the same emotion, but it seemed like I had the same emotion as you did, Rana. And I thought to myself, well, what if in the training, I know we're not here to critique the video, but what if the training were done in the reverse? And that is, those who had an advantage were asked for every advantage you stayed, and if you didn't have it, you go forward. So it would have been the reverse, and you would have had Black and brown skinned individuals having a huge advantage. So I sort of was playing that in this race, and I was trying to play that out in my mind, like and so what my conclusion was, well, certainly I don't want to see anyone suffer any more than they already have in real life, Rana. I think sometimes we have to have these sort of painful encounters and experiences in order for it to sink in and propel us to that next space. Now, I sort of made some assumptions that, particularly the way the video closed out and everyone was sort of holding hands, and there were a lot of, I'll say, white faces that had sort of their head down in recognition of kind of this experience they'd all been through. So, but I do think sometimes we have to get to a very painful discussion in order to, compel us to change or what have you. So, I mean, I think that I'm seeing from the nods here, I think everyone sort of understands that, but I certainly, as we go forward and maybe offer any training or engage in anything, we should be certainly sensitive to how is that conveyed, and maybe teeing it up in that conversation of this is, it's going to be uncomfortable for people for many different reasons. And but in order to kind of have the best experience and kind of get to where we need to go, that's sort of this important evolution. So
Dan, and then Sarah.
I'm kind of following up on that same topic. In a different professional role, in a different job I had many years ago, I was part of a workshop on serving underserved communities. It was brought in by a professional group, very well received type of topic. Well-reviewed type of topic. And they kind of did similar exercises to what that video was. And it upset a lot of people in the room, including myself. Some of the questions they asked were asked at a time when some of the people weren't ready to answer them in front of their colleagues and peers. So some people were thrilled. In this specific case, they would give a topic or a statement like, if you're part of this religious group, the majority group, please move to this side of the room. If you are heteronormative, please move to this side of the room. And it was something that for me was crazy. It came at a crazy time in my life, and it was super painful, left me in tears. I was so impacted in a negative way by that good intentioned exercise that I still look back when that conversation came up at the last meeting, it hit me hard. And I think that's just something to be cognizant, following up on what Shelby just said, like in whatever training or suggestions come out of this group, I just want to make sure whoever comes knows that everyone's so different and everyone comes from different backgrounds. Not everyone's ready to have that conversation, and no one should be forced in a group setting to divulge anything about themselves or their experiences until they're ready to do that. There are, like Rana said, you can get the same result, positive results in different ways, and putting people who are willing and trying to better themselves in on the spot like that can really have a negative impact.
I have been in that position as well, Dan. It's very uncomfortable. I think there's a quote by Brené Brown. She is a very well-known social worker and researcher and public speaker. And I keep this in mind. I try to every day. Every single person has a story that will break your heart. And if you're paying attention, many people have a story that will bring you to your knees. Nobody rides for free. And so I think that we really are talking about people who have been marginalized for lots of aspects of their identities, but there's also pieces of individual stories that we really want to be respectful of, and that people need to be the drivers of their own stories, and other people's stories are not ours to tell. Ema?
Yeah, that reminds me, I actually recently read a 2-part series that I'll share with the group that kind of pretty much talks about blending cultural competency and cultural humility, and how that relationship is truly needed to connect, to kind of build that connection. And reading through the article, it really brought focus to what we're talking about, intercultural. I think it's interculturalism, I think it was called, which pretty much, it's intercultural variation. So they suggested that to avoid stereotyping. This was a medical related article, but it's stereotyping patients from different cultures. So it's definitely something that when going, yes, it's important or noticeable to be aware of, our differences, but also understanding that, okay, it's just, we're aware of it in that moment. We need to keep, moving on to, the purpose of our work. So.
It's a really good conversation, and sort of transitioning to just sort of feedback about the larger work that the YMCA is doing around looking at issues of equity, inclusion, and diversity. I hope that we can kind of stay in conversation with them and stay in touch. I think that being an international institution with all these local and regional pockets, they're figuring out some creative ways to do this kind of education, and they don't do it perfectly, but I think we might be able to learn a bit from them and not reinvent the wheel as we're continuing to figure out how to educate ourselves and our staff. Kim, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just curious, have you had conversations with, are there additional, I'm just not sure what level have your conversations with them gone to in terms of additional help, support, training that they might be able, how could they partner or collaborate with us?
The last conversation I had with Jeff was that they might have had some trainings or have some trainings to share. Like they might be able to share some of their training resources with us. That would be low cost or free. I'll have to go back and look at my notes to see exactly what that was. But he did think that that might be one way that he might be able to contribute to our process. That was one of the things we talked about. Shelby?
Kara, did we, I know I joined a couple minutes late. Did we walk through the goals? I know that was your first on your agenda.
No,
item.
I got so eager to
okay.
No,
to
this follow
is
up. So sorry about that.
I just didn't know if this was sort of spinning off of like
no.
Okay.
It was just me getting
excited. It's all good.
So we'll do that next.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you for pointing that out.
Well, I think that
I have it here.
I think it's important, so many times sort of, I feel like I leave these meetings and I want these conversations to like sort of blossom and expand into the community. But I know that we've had conversations as a committee about what is the role of this committee. And I made some comments to that effect in the email that I sent to the group. So I think it's important. So we're having a lot of great conversation, but I also think it's important for us to kind of continue to like make sure we're inching the ball closer to whatever that perpetual goal line is.
Yeah.
So that we can be recognized as as a committee that is bringing about whatever change or whatever the message
Absolutely. Is. Let's do that now, and then we'll come back to debriefing and following up, because I do think, Shelby, your point is spot on. Like this will help us frame the conversation, and we won't be simply driven by my enthusiasm. So the goals that I put in the annual report were very similar to the ones from the year before, although I edited them slightly. Admittedly, you all know the history of this group has had a couple years of being really low key, not doing being very active. And I hadn't even realized, not last year, but the year, not for 2020, but for 2019, that as the chairperson, I had to write this report. Like I just kind of figured it out at the last minute. So in the future, we will do these goals together. Thus far, these are goals that sort of in my brain in conversation with a couple other people. So, but the goals as they are right now, well, let's just go one step back and think about our purpose again, which is to review town services, to ensure the services are provided equally and are accessible to all residents, and further to identify ways to promote increased diversity and inclusiveness in town services, employment, and volunteer opportunities. The goals for 2021, as set in the 2020 annual report, are to engage the community in the work of the committee. This is a new goal. To create a training plan for town staff, boards, and committees. This is a continued goal. To increase/improve language access, continued goal. Outreach to community organizations, continued. explore diversity and inclusion on town committees, new, and use of town resources for religious and cultural events, continued, because we never really closed that loop. So question and discussions on those particular goals, and truly, if you have experience about how committees have prioritized goals and sort of form their work around them, I welcome input about that.
So my
Rana?
question is about the training. Do we have is it our purview to decide, let's say there's a training that we like that the Y does. So is it within our purview to say, okay, all town employees now have to attend this training?
It would be our role. We can't mandate anything, but we can make a recommendation to the town manager and or the board of selectmen, depending on whose role it is. And in that case, that example, it would be the town manager. And so we would make a recommendation for all town employees or all committee members, whomever, to participate in XYZ training. And then the town manager would have the ability to either follow that recommendation as we make it, or to adapt that recommendation on their own, or to reject that recommendation, frankly. But I mean, the town manager and the board of selectmen are trusting us to make recommendations that they would likely find reasonable.
Oh, that's great.
Kim?
Just so how I might see that working is we're regularly, and this is sort of in my capacity as the HR director, we're regularly looking and evaluating training opportunities. And I think in many of the discussions and conversations that this committee has, we either become aware of additional resources that are out there, or what other entities in the community are doing and maybe how they have used. I think that's really helpful. Right now, it's really challenging because between COVID and between a lot of communities looking for these training resources, they've become, frankly, I think it's a supply and demand thing. Some of them are very expensive and some of them are booking out months in advance. So I think part of the value is, the connecting even to the why and understanding what resources they may have and who they can tie us into, or, recommend potentially as training. There's huge value in that.
Yeah, Rana.
I have a very wild idea. I think that this group of people is really a wonderful group of people. I think that we all work together very well. We could decide that we will prepare a training. In a sense, we could sort of spend some time figuring out, although it would be very time consuming, conceivably, but it was just, as I said, a wild idea to throw out.
I love the wildness of your idea. I don't think it's outrageous. I don't know that it's realistic. And there are so many experts out there, and I'm not an expert, and I don't want to claim expertise. And I don't want to, you all are volunteers, those of you who are not paid for your jobs at the town. And that is not a responsibility I would expect or ask of you. But heck, if you want to take on the volunteer task of doing a heck of a lot of research about it, you're welcome to. Shelby? Oh, you're muted, Shelby.
Sorry, I think that a couple thoughts. So, Ron, I appreciate you putting that out there. And I guess I would say that I think, finding people that are experienced and sort of have the slide deck ready and know how to engage, across different, whether it's virtual or in person. I think we should go down that road to not reinvent the wheel, so to speak. However, I think that there are different ways in which we might do that. So one of our goals is engaging with other community groups. And I know certainly Kara has done this, as well as Dan through his work at the library, with Westborough Connects and the Rotarians with the Square One group, and starting to have some difficult conversations, challenging conversations about a number of different topics. diversity and inclusion and racism hasn't been one of those, but I know it's been, it's over here sort of in the parking lot of many of those conversations about how do we get there. And given the work of the schools now with the survey, I feel like we're sort of converging on this. So I think there's some opportunity to say, what are other groups doing? How can the town appropriately support, collaborate with those groups, and then obviously through the support of Kim and Christy, then sort of how do we engage those town staff in that training? Because there's two ways. You can do town staff training very specific to, let's take in the context of your job as you're sitting in your office and you're engaging with people, or, hey, I'm part of this larger community that my job is to provide services to, and so therefore I'm going to be a part of a training that is intended to be as community-wide as we can get it. So I think as we go down that path, I think there are a couple different ways, and I think that training probably, if I'm a staff member, I'd like both, right? I want to be part of a community training, but I also want to know, hey, I'm in the finance department and I'm collecting people's money and I have to explain taxes to them, and they're a newcomer to Westborough in this country. And, how do I do that? Because I've struggled with that in the past. That's a very specific kind of training. So I think we should kind of consider both. The other thing I'll throw out there is, as we have various good ideas, and Carrie, you've already kind of listed the goals, which is great. I think we should bounce them up against our mission. So very simply, I like little chart here, right? So it's kind of, to me, we've got two functions: service, expanding service or providing services that are equal and inclusive, right? That's kind of one lane. And the other is really around diversity and inclusiveness of services, employment, and volunteer opportunities. And I think as we come up with ideas, we've got to really challenge ourselves as committee members to say, does it fit in one of these buckets? Like, prove it to the group, prove it to each other that this great idea really meets the mission of the schools. And if it doesn't, let's press on that a little bit. And maybe that becomes, if we continue to say that we keep going at this and we say it's not part of our mission, but it's the same thing, then maybe our mission needs to be expanded. Then we bring that to the Board of Selectmen or whatever. But I don't know. I think we just need to challenge ourselves in okay, so what's next? And, like for me, hiring and diversity and practices, and, to me, that's a critical next piece, but it's like, how do we do it? How do we do that? Because I look to Kim over here on my left, at least on my screen, and say, Kim's got to kind of drive a lot of that, but how can this committee support that effort?
Mhm.
So anyway, enough said.
Thank you.
Sorry to draw.
No, I think that's a really important clarifying statement, and I think it helps us to stay on track. I think it's really important. I'd
be the first one to get off my own track, trust me, but I just at
the same time, I also want to just like hold, we said this when we first started working together, that there's content in the subject matter that we're talking about raises emotional reactions for people and personal experiences. And I don't want to ignore those. At the same time, I want to be really efficient and effective. So please know that I won't hear us far away, but thank you for bringing us back to the heart.
Yeah, I don't want to take away from that. I think, Kara, having a bond within this group and relationships and being able to share is an important part of our ability to work in small groups or as a whole committee. So I think that's really, really important. And maybe this group needs a training. I mean, I think that I want to say that Rana said that, a while ago, but maybe we need a training. And how can we do that? Or it's like exploring difficult conversations, or I don't know what it is, but and maybe that's an important part of how we sort of say, here's where we go from here. I mean, I have to believe that between whatever we've done as a town for staff in the past, or certainly within the schools, there has to be content. There have to be subject matter experts. Mike, and you guys have been trained in some, there must be content there that could enlighten us.
Rana?
I think that if we did participate in a training workshop, whatever, what happens, I would think in a group is then the tentacles reach out and out and out and out and out to the community at large. And we're not a large group, but once there is a certain amount of training and understanding, then that can go, that's a possibility, the potential to reach way further than the 12 of us or however many people.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think it's not a bad idea.
Yeah, Kim Foster and I have revisited this conversation 100 times without getting to a conclusion that we want to bring training to town staff. And, there are some logistical and other barriers that have gotten in the way, but I also recognize that one of the barriers maybe that we haven't touched on explicitly is that what will that be? And what will the content be? Who will provide it? Who will attend? And I guess one way that we may be able to start thinking about that is thinking of us, the 11 of us, as a kind of microcosm of the community and potentially even of town personnel. We're not necessarily, but and finding a training that we can do that would inspire us to recommend training for the larger staff. Dan, and then Ryan.
So when we were discussing the survey that the schools did, I was thinking about that a lot afterwards. And I was thinking when we were talking about shifting into focusing on town staff, of which I am one thing I thought might be really a helpful starting point is to issue a survey to town staff members with similar questions. So when choosing the right training for staff, there's some inkling of some sort as to where the training should be focused. Do town employees feel welcome in their backgrounds? Some of the same questions that were posed to the students, I thought could be very telling from a town employee standpoint. And then with those results, it could at least start the conversation because like Kim was saying, there's so many different things out there, so many different resources, and they can be very costly and hard to come by. If we could start identifying what the issue is before trying to come up with this other plan that might not even hit where it needed to hit, that could be helpful.
Ryan?
I just want to bring up another point regarding the goals and mission. I think that somewhere in there we should include a priority of adapting, acknowledging, and learning from the constantly changing atmosphere of the United States. Because although we do a lot of the work here locally and are learning from organizations and community leaders around us, we also need to take a step back and look at the bigger picture too, and acknowledge different events that come to light and adapt our missions, adapt our needs, adapt our work to fill in the space and make sure that whatever communities are most in need at the moment are receiving the services that they need. So, for example, this past week, as some of you might know, there was a mass shooting down in Atlanta, Georgia, in which 6 Asian women were killed. I think that we should make it a priority to first acknowledge that the event has happened, either by issuing a statement or holding some sort of forum, just making sure that the Westborough community knows this has happened. Because although we are a very diverse and inclusive community, we are a West bubble, some like to call us. And there are a lot of people who don't realize that these things are happening across the country. And our position as a diversity and inclusion committee is incredibly valuable. We can help to educate, we can help to make people know that these things are happening, and not just for the Asian community, but also for other issues happening for other marginalized groups. So I think that that should be one of our priorities, either listed in the goals or in even our mission statement.
On a tangent, but hopefully you'll see the relatedness. Last year, no, in 2019, a long time ago, I spearheaded the start of a task force within the town for substance use. And we had a few meetings, and then we kind of stalled right around the time the pandemic started with a plan to like kind of recognition that we're having trouble moving forward with what the task force's actions were going to be because we weren't clear about our mission, our vision, our values, and that we needed to take a step back and kind of carve that out and prioritize our goals. And our plan was to hire a consultant to help us do that in a retreat type of situation. COVID happened, that has gone way, way, way on the back burner, but I'll come back to it. It makes me think though of this situation that this, to your point, Ryan, what the Diversity and Inclusion Committee was envisioned to be when the then town manager started it has evolved. Not in that the mission is veering away from focusing on town services, it still is, but the conversation about how do we make informed decisions about how to influence town services, that has shifted, that has changed. I mean, in the last 9 months, this conversation has changed. So would there be value and would it be appropriate? So would there be value? I think the answer is yes. So I want to kind of turn this question to our member of the select board and our member of town leadership on the committee to ask the concrete question of, is it allowable? Is there money to support this committee to get some training and or to get some consultation to help us focus all these things that we keep kind of circling around? So
we do have training budgets. I think honestly, to have something to react to, are you talking about, seeing an actual proposal? I think we potentially do. It would just be needing to know exactly what it is and what the cost is before being able to make a commitment.
Yeah, I just wouldn't want to do we have $0? Do we have a few dollars? I just wanted where do we need to structure our thinking around it? Shelby, did you want to comment on that at all?
Actually, no, I don't want to add to what Kim had said, where I thought you were going in response to Ryan's very astute comment was, is it appropriate for this committee to issue a statement in response to events that happen that don't happen in our backyard, but for which we feel that for whatever reason, this committee feels would be appropriate to issue such a statement, in response to that. So using the Atlanta tragedy that just happened, we have a significant Asian community here. I feel that it would be completely appropriate for us to issue a very brief but poignant statement from this committee, acknowledging the event. And again, I don't know the details of it. I'm not in law enforcement. I really haven't followed the case other than the headlines, but to acknowledge, how we feel, and obviously in a positive way, about all members of our community, but specifically whatever that language is. So I'll make that a motion that this committee, the members of this committee draft a statement and issue it as, as the committee, publicly.
Thank you for the motion. Does someone want to second that?
Second.
Okay, I saw Mike first, Mike Daniels.
I second.
Thank you for seconding. All right, any discussion about, oh yes, Kim.
Kara, do you just want to mention maybe now, you have on behalf of your department, and I'm wondering in the past when there have been other incidents, you've issued statements.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if we don't try to coordinate, I don't know if you had plans to do something similar for the most recent ones.
Thank you for asking. Yeah, you all probably know that I have, after multiple critical incidents that have occurred and in the headlines, made a statement on behalf of the Youth and Family Services Department in conjunction with my Youth Commission. We typically have done those with an emphasis on the mental health impact of these incidents, but it hopefully is also obvious that we're doing it with an emphasis on a value of racial justice and acknowledgement of systemic oppression. And I would be honored if the Diversity and Inclusion Committee wanted to do a joint statement with me as Youth and Family Services and the Youth Commission. That would
Yeah.
be awesome.
I was going to say, I mean, I think we can
Yay.
generate that, and then I think we can forward it. I mean, like, for example, the selectmen have a meeting. It's not an agenda item right now. You know, it's not, the agenda has not been issued. Has it, Kim? I haven't seen it.
It
It's been
was today. It
posted?
was just today.
Okay, I didn't see it. Once you're chair, you lose track of all things. But
You can squeeze me into that thing at the beginning, right?
no, but
Right.
I mean, why not offer, and again, Kim, you know, under your guidance, you know, multiple department committees or whatever signing on. I mean, it could be, I could think of a number. It could be the schools. It could be the, you know, cultural council. It could be the police department. I don't know, like, may want to say, yes, our names are on this as
Mhm.
well. And we're supportive of it. So it's one statement, because I agree with you. We don't want like 17 different statements coming out.
I think it's more powerful when it's one
Mhm.
with,
Right.
with many people signing on to the same.
Mhm.
That's my opinion, at least. And there may be other community entities that would
Mhm.
sign
Yeah.
on as well.
Yeah, I definitely know a number of town departments, leaders in town departments and community organizations and individuals who would love to be a part of that. So does anyone want to amend the motion slightly, or does it need to be amended?
We can amend it to have the, well, why don't you go with your thought, Kara? Because then we can
Okay,
just say
and-
yes.
and
so
then,
that's moved.
And then just logistics of it. Do we talk about that after the vote or before the
Yeah.
vote?
Oh, sorry, Kim.
Oh, no. I mean,
What
my
are we gonna say,
suggestion
Kim?
would
Yeah.
be just to, that the committee would draft a statement that may be issued in conjunction with other town entities or community entities. I don't think you have to be any more specific.
Great. All right,
So,
so Kim has
as
revised the
amended.
motion. We may have a second for the revised motion.
Second.
Mike, okay. All right, so I'm gonna do a roll call vote and then we'll figure out the logistics. I'm gonna start, so say your name and your vote. Dan,
Barber, yes.
Rana,
Yes,
Kim,
Foster, yes?
Ryan,
When, yes.
Shelby,
Marshall, yes.
Sarah,
Connors, yes.
Mike,
Daniels, yes.
Ema,
Ness, yes.
and Presley, yes. So while I certainly have the experience of writing statements, they are of a very particular nature. And I, again, do not claim expertise. I try not to ever, but may I have a volunteer from this group to co-author the draft with me? Ryan,
I would be willing
love
to.
that. Thank you. Be great. So we'll chat offline about it. Start getting something
And
going.
Rana, for the minutes, just not to be too particular, but you do need to actually capture the roll call vote, like with the names. So Barbara, yes.
You have to list
the
every
names,
person's,
the names, or it's not sufficient to say unanimous?
no,
No, because it's virtual. So just
And this-
know that it is, but just, you know, don't
Okay.
worry about the order so
All right.
much, but yeah.
All right, all right, got it.
so I'm gonna go ahead and shift the conversation to the specifically responding to hate violence. And I put on the agenda item that kind of broad umbrella with the caveat knowing that I wanted to acknowledge specifically the anti-Asian violence that we have been talking about in this group. Thank you, Ryan, for persistently making sure that that is the forefront of our conversation. I really am grateful that you bring your voice to that. Ryan and I got to talk a little bit about what is going on nationally and what resources are available for people who experience hate violence, anti-Asian hate violence specifically. And we also got to talking about what resources are out there for other types of hate violence as well. So what I want this portion of the conversation to be is talk about what those resources are, because I think that as town departments, and then we can make, figure out how to disseminate this information, like that part of town services and making sure people are included and making sure that we're engaging the community in our work, that it can be our job as the town to get this information to people. So just thinking again, Shelby, to your point of keeping us kind of on mission, right? So I want to talk about what the resources are available. I also asked Mike, I reached out to Chief Jeff Laurie and to Sergeant Daniels about what is happening on the law enforcement end as far as what do we know about like hate crimes. So these are crimes that land their way in the police. So we could learn a little bit about like some data about what's happening on the police end of things and how the police respond to calls around bias related violence or crimes. So I want to start with the non-law enforcement end of the conversation, but I just want you to know that I'm hoping that we can have both of that. So yeah, I just want to acknowledge that I don't know, I haven't read the headlines all day long to know if anybody is yet explicitly and formally investigating the shootings in Atlanta as a hate crime. I know it hadn't been flagged as that early this morning, but we are acknowledging that Asian-owned businesses and Asian people died explicitly as a result of a gunman going in and shooting them. So it's a horrific story. It has clearly stirred fear for many people. As Ryan has been sharing with us, and as I'm learning, seeking my own information, this is not new fear, but this is fear that has been flamed by politics over the last year or so. I just before this meeting, I saw like I'm just seeking more information. There's an actress, an actor named Ashley Park. She is on the show Emily in Paris. I don't watch that show, but apparently it's a show on Netflix that's popular. But she put out a statement, just like personal statement about sort of being an Asian woman and how seeing this in the media and then seeing the public's response to it has impacted her. So if it's an Instagram, if you just Google it, you could see it. It's just one, I'm sure, of many such things, but just to give us again, as Ryan has showed us, just appreciating the real life impact of these experiences. So I want to talk about resources, but Ryan, do you want to add to that conversation a little bit before we dive into resources?
Yes, sure. I first want to say that I really appreciate the platform and the openness of every single one of you, because these are the little steps that we have to take in order to ensure change happens. But when I first learned of this event, I was in grief. I was devastated, but I was not surprised, and that's highly disturbing. Even though I've been following the anti-Asian hate crimes for quite a while now, this hit really close to home just because I do have a lot of aunts and family members who work in nail salons and in massage parlors. And all these attacks were unprovoked. These are just Asian Americans struggling to make a life for themselves in this country that promised them peace and opportunity and freedom and safety, and they can't even get those basic necessities. So I think that as an organization, as a committee, but also as people, we have a moral responsibility to not just acknowledge that these events exist, but also to elevate the stories and the individuals behind those names you see in the headlines. So I really appreciate Kara just bringing this to the forefront and making this a topic of conversation, because that is 100% necessary.
Kara, I feel like you
Go
have
ahead,
the start.
Shelley.
I'm sorry. I feel like you have the start of that statement. Seriously, I mean, Ryan, you know, obviously you speak from a very personal view and perspective on this particular matter. And I certainly, as you see from the heads nodding around here in the room, that we respect that and welcome it. And, it needs to be heard. What comes to mind and, is, we don't, as individuals, we don't start being racist or whateverist, right? Right. So sort of, I feel like part of that statement, or part of where we need to be, is if we could continue to live our lives and act through the eyes of children, what would that look like, in your daily life, right? Because that's not how we start, but somehow we get there, and it's disgusting and very sad.
Absolutely. And I even think that looking beyond and just in general, it is our duty to identify the community that's hurting or in pain, whether it's the Asian community, the Black community, and how we can best support them in a time when they're suffering. Because as an Asian, as a Vietnamese Laotian American, I see my family members reflected in these women. Their names are different, but I see my own. These are my people, my community, and we're hurting. So I just personally think that what we're doing right now to help AAPI individuals is great. But even beyond that, whether it's work for like the Black community or the Brown community, this should always be a topic of conversation. This constantly needs to happen, and not just brought up by me, but by everyone. Thank you.
One of the ways that we can continue to make this conversation, to keep this at the forefront of the conversation and to bring people's awareness to the reality of anti-Asian hate violence, as well as other types of hate violence, is to make sure that those incidents of bias are reported. And, in the really grassroots, like, change the world idealist in me, I want to prevent these from happening, right? I want to erase systemic racism. So, I mean, that's a big goal, but meanwhile, we got to get the reporting out there. So there are a number of mechanisms to do that, and I want to make the public and all of us aware of some of those mechanisms. Will you talk about Stop API Hate, Ryan? Just what that is and how people can access it?
Yes, so stopaaphate.org is a website and organization catered toward AAPI individuals, in which they can go and report their hate crimes. They've been at the forefront of the statistics on anti-Asian hate violence across the country. So most of the statistics, the alarming statistics, have been produced by them. That is the gist of their organization.
So people can go to the website and report their experiences of hate violence.
Yes.
There are also similar organizations or institutions or forums where people can report other types of hate violence, nonprofit organizations who gather the data for purposes of better understanding, raising awareness, bringing attention to these issues. I know I used to be the director of the anti-violence program at Fenway Health, or of the violence recovery program at Fenway Health, and we served LGBT survivors of interpersonal violence and hate violence. And we at Fenway collected data about LGBT hate violence. So Fenway Health's violence recovery program collects data about anti-LGBT violence on a statewide level, and then contributes that to national data that is collected across the country. Rana?
I think that the ADL is a repository for all reports of hate crimes. So the statistics, the horrific statistics, can unfortunately be found through ADL. Yes,
and I think we're also talking about two different things. One is hate crimes, those that rise to the level of being investigated by law enforcement, but also other types of acts of bias-based violence that may not be reported to law enforcement or may not rise to the level of being considered a crime. So I think that some of these nonprofit organizations that are doing this work on their own, like privately collect data that isn't necessarily contributed to by some of the government and more public sectors. But Ryan, yeah, Ryan,
sorry,
please.
sorry.
Go
I
ahead.
forgot to add that the website stopaaphate.org is also catered toward non-English speaking individuals as well. So the Asian American community is notoriously known for being for having people who struggle to speak in English. And that's why a lot of the violence, I believe, personally, is directed toward them because they're vulnerable and they can't communicate well. But stopaaphate.org makes their form available in as many different Asian languages as possible, whether it's Mandarin, Korean, Vietnamese, Tagalog, Cambodian, Lao, etc. And by doing that, it makes it more accessible for especially Asian elders who have been one of the highest targeted groups. Asian elders and Asian women are make up the majority of these hate incidents, and it's incredibly sad. I believe in the past year alone, Stop AAPI Hate has recorded 3,800 hate incidents against Asian Americans, and those are only reported ones. So imagine how many are taking place every day. But that is an amazing resource to direct non-English speaking individuals to.
Thank you.
Kara, I think as we talk about statistics, I thought that you said sort of as we transition into this segment of the conversation that you and Sergeant Daniels had talked about maybe sharing some data. You know, I think one of the challenges, you know, that, and I remember this when the board issued its statement on anti-racism, you know, there is a little bit of that Westborough bubble that says, oh, that doesn't happen here. So, you know, but I do think, Brian, to your point in our conversation, it's very important that we, you know, we balance the national conversation with our community and make sure people can relate to it, because if people can't relate to it, it tends to become political, right? It tends to just like, oh, you're picking a side or whatever. So I am interested, and Mike, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm interested in understanding what kind of data do we have here in Westborough as it relates to sort of, I guess, big bucket, you know, hate crimes or racially sort of diversity motivated. I don't know what the right term is. And then how do we distill them down? And can you shed some light on that?
You're in the spotlight, Mike, all you.
Okay. I'd like to share my screen because I did a quick slide.
Oh, let
deck.
me do that. I'll let you do that.
All right. So I just hit share screen.
There you go.
Okay.
Yeah, just my gratitude to Mike for acting quickly, because I emailed him and the chief on Tuesday, I think.
So I don't know why this is not letting me. Hold on.
Is it not letting you share?
Yeah. Anyway, I mean, I could probably go without it. Can you guys still?
Try now, see if that helps.
While Mike is pulling that up, I put it in the chat, but I just, as if we have resources, we talk about creating visibility for our committee and engaging the committee, let's get something out to Christy or Kim, whomever posts, to be honest with you, I don't know who does that, on the town's website on behalf of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, that these are resources. So we should maybe think about that.
Yeah, that's my intention. So in addition to these resources that we're listing today, I think that we should gather resources. So if you know of resources specified for a particular community who does experience bias-based violence, please share them with me, and I will make sure that they get consolidated into a list and posted.
So Kara, can I just make a recommendation because of the timing of the Atlanta event and what we've talked about here? I think it would be impactful, like sort of in response to that, to have a post be just about Asian related resources for, that Ryan and others may have access to. So I think we should keep an ongoing list, because
Yep.
sadly we'll need them.
Yep.
But just to kind of have that impactful, timely, current statement, that's just a suggestion from.
Agreed. No, I think it's important. I think that's a critical point, that we can compile a list that can be a resource on our website, but the specific in response to recent events, we'll do it specific to the AAPI community.
Am I looking now?
Yeah, we can see it.
Yep. All right.
You're good.
Cool. All right. So as Kara said, I was able to, this was pretty much done in the last 24 hours in response to the email Kara sent to Chief Laurie. But I think it's important, before I continue on, for us to define what hate crime is, because I think a lot of people don't really understand the elements and the mechanism, or what makes a hate crime. So hate crime is defined as crimes that are motivated by the offender's bias toward the victim, because the victim is a member of a protected group. So, typically whenever we charge someone with a crime, specifically a hate crime, we're looking for three things, or three elements to be met. The first one's the actual criminal offense. And what we see a lot of, not just in Westborough, but across the country, typically when we're dealing with hate crimes, it's usually things like assault and battery, or acts of vandalism, property damage, right, where there's a victim involved. So, secondary to that, the second element we look at is intent. What was the intent of the individual perpetrating this crime? Was it to intimidate, coerce someone to do something, or instill fear? And of course, the protected characteristic, in other words, that's, was the offender targeting the victim because of their race, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, or even disabilities. So those are the three things that really make up a hate crime. And that actually came right off of the website from the AG's office in Massachusetts. So law enforcement typically we look at three crimes, or three statutes that we charge people with who are perpetrators of hate crimes. The first one is Chapter 265-39. And as you can see, it's assault and battery with a purpose to intimidate. And basically, it's just whoever commits an assault and battery upon a person, or damages the real personal property, things like a car, they're trying to intimidate someone. So that's really what sums it up. Then we go into 265, Section 37, which is more of a civil rights violation. So, under Chapter 265, Section 37, which is also carries criminal penalties, no person, whether or not acting under color of law, shall by force or threat of force willfully injure, intimidate, or interfere with, or attempt to injure, or oppress, or threaten any person in the free exercise or enjoyment of any right or privilege secured to him by the Constitution or the laws of the Commonwealth. So, those two chapters and sections kind of coincide with one another, and they're both criminal acts. The first one, 265, Section 39, which I mentioned before, that's the most commonly used charge that we use in law enforcement to charge somebody with a hate crime. We also have, and I actually didn't list it, but we also have criminal harassment, which is a series of, or a pattern of conduct over a period of time that someone finds annoying, and it doesn't necessarily really mention harassing someone because of race, but those are the three things that we would really look at. If someone came to us indicating that they were the victim of a hate crime. And actually, I added the example here: if a police officer acts within the color of law, under their authority to arrest someone. If they make an arrest without probable cause, you could be looking at a violation of such, depending on how egregious the act is. So bias motivated conduct. The law looks at another 3 factors. As you can see, the first factor is just conduct. What is the offender doing? Are they intimidating, threatening, or coercing someone? And the second one's interfering with civil rights. Is the offender interfering or attempts to interfere with a victim's civil rights? And then obviously, bias motivation. Was there bias associated with the violation? So was the offender's conduct motivated by a victim of a protected group? So Kara mentioned this earlier, which I think is extremely important because data often can be skewed. So basically what we do on our end is the only data that we collect, as Kara and Ryan had mentioned, is data that's reported to us or crimes that are reported to us. Whenever a crime is reported to us, this includes hate crimes, we enter it into our records management system, which asks us for victim information. We input the information, and all we're really doing is we're putting in, the vital statistics of that person, and it includes gender and race. Once we enter the information and we enter a charge, if it's a hate crime charge, the system will ask us if there's a bias motivation. So sometimes you may get anti-Black, anti-white, might be a religious group, and there's a number of categories and labels that we can assign to each crime. Now, if the computer detects that or the management system detects that we're charging someone with a hate crime, it'll give us a critical error if there is no bias motivation attached to it. So before we can even charge someone with a crime or send the data to the FBI, we have to know what the bias motivation was to associate it with that crime. And then, of course, at the end of the month, what ends up happening is all data, charges and so forth they're sent in to the FBI uniform crime reports. So they maintain that data actually from across the country. And you can actually go onto the FBI website and pull up data specific to Westborough. So I asked one of our administrators to run our data for the last 10 years. And I cross-referenced that with the FBI data. And from 2010 to 2019, which was the last time the FBI has collected data, we've only had one race-related hate crime. That was in 2013. And then in 2017, we had one hate crime based on religion. So, obviously that number is low, but, in the end, as we talked about, we have to look at, it doesn't mean these things aren't happening. I think people sometimes don't understand what it is. And, one of the major concerns that we have is that we have people obviously who live in the community that may be undocumented. So they're not coming to the police to report these crimes. So this is why, our community policing efforts and social media is important to us, because we want people to feel comfortable enough with the police so that they don't feel like we're a barrier to, them, reporting that they were victimized. So, we're trying. The final question, which was asked, was what is our process if a resident has a complaint about biased behavior by police? Oh, I'm sorry. Let me just go back one. Kara had asked in her email if we have a special response team. We don't. Just really short response. I mean, we don't have a special protocol when someone calls us to report a hate crime. Now, for biased behavior by a police officer, we were asked what the procedure is for reporting biased behavior. And I actually went into our policy management system and pulled out an excerpt from the summary of our internal affairs policy. And it reads, the criteria for determining the categories of complaints to be investigated under the direction of the deputy chief include, but are not limited to, allegations of corruption, brutality, use of excessive force, violation of civil rights, criminal misconduct, complaints against the department, and any other matter as directed by the chief of police. A criteria for the assignment of an investigation to a shift commander may include, but are not limited, not limited to such offenses as alleged rudeness, tardiness, and minor cases of insubordination. So there's several steps when a complaint is received. And as you can see from the PowerPoint, the first step is just the intake or the first initial complaint. And this is usually taken by a supervisor, someone who holds the rank of sergeant, lieutenant, and above. So once we receive that report or that complaint, the individual is asked to fill out a form detailing what occurred, which is then documented by the shift supervisor or the shift commander. And then we prepare a report of what was alleged. Once we get that report together, we forward it to our Deputy Chief Minardi, who's our internal affairs officer, and he reviews all complaints. When he reviews all complaints, the next step is commencement. He decides whether an internal affairs investigation he determines if an internal affairs investigation needs to be opened. When that's done, obviously we're in full-blown investigation. And at that point, we're gathering as much information as we can from all those involved, including, victims, the officers involved, any staff or any witnesses that might have been present during this incident. So at the conclusion of one of these investigations, usually they're done within 30 days. So, the end result is, a designation. So we have 4 designations. The first one is sustained, as you can see, and it says complaint was valid and supported by sufficient evidence. Then not sustained, obviously inadequate or insufficient evidence to either prove or disprove the complaint, or unfounded, allegations were baseless and without foundation, or exonerated, complaint unjustified, unwarranted, actions of employee were in compliance with law or policy. When everything's done and a designation has been given to the investigation, a complainant will be notified promptly as to the final results, either personally or by mail. So earlier in our conversation, we mentioned resources. We don't have referral services, and typically the last incident that we had in 2017 was some graffiti or tagging at the high school, in which case we called the Anti-Defamation League, and they keep a ton of information about these incidents, or there may be some graffiti that we're not familiar with. They may be able to identify it, so it's definitely a good resource. Mass Equality is a politically driven group that obviously promotes equality. So if you're looking to change things and you're into politics, they're a good resource to go to. And then GLAAD is actually a resource that I use to actually gather some of these statistics. So if you ever need legal advocates or public defenders, that's a great resource to have. So Does anybody have any questions? That's really all I had. And I really wanted to actually add more, but, you know, given our time restraints, you know, that was kind of difficult. I wanted to get this information out as quickly as possible.
I think this is really helpful.
I'm
It's-
sorry, Kara, I missed you for a second.
Oh, it's okay. Can you hear me now?
I got you.
I think this is really helpful. And while I'd be interested in anything more you had to add, I don't know that I'd be able to process it all in addition, because this is, you know, there's some technical stuff here that people have to wrap their heads around, and you know, the low number of reported hate crimes is compelling because, I mean, you're saying yourself as a police officer, we know that there's more happening than is
Oh, there
rising
definitely
to
is.
right?
Yeah.
So that makes my brain work. And so thank you for sharing what you did. And I can't imagine
Thank you,
hearing
Mike.
more
Yeah,
now.
very thorough. Thank you.
No problem. One other thing I'd like to add, I actually, if you go on FBI, I'll send a link, or I'll send it through email. If you go on Uniform Crime Reports, they produce all sorts of data. Any data relating to hate crimes, especially race related, they break it down. You can go into any state, in any municipality or municipal law enforcement agency, even some of the colleges, when they report, it gets uploaded to the FBI database, and you can review that. The latest data that I was able to see was in 2019. So, but what I did see is over the last 10 years, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is steadily seeing about 400 hate crimes reported across the Commonwealth. And last year, there was an increase in that trend by 10%. I don't have the exact number, but I think 2017 was where it reached its peak with over 500 hate crimes reported. And that's, as I said before, just reported crimes.
Mm-hmm. It's an important distinction.
Any other questions?
I think it's worth, Kara, to your point, really kind of processing this, you know, Mike, sadly, I don't have to tell you that, you know, so many people don't understand or don't trust, please don't take that offensively, the police, and they don't understand the process. So what struck me is when I saw the slide about the bias, you know, like motivation bias, like within, you know, if an officer were to be charged or accused of that, excuse me, you know, the cynical person, given all that we've seen, right, sees that and says, wow, well, it's such an internal process. How do I, as just, you know,
So
Shelby, yes, you know, Shelby, the resident, like, how do I trust that process? How am I represented in that process fairly? Because it doesn't seem to sort of be balanced. So I think, I'm not asking you to defend that here, but I do think, again, when we think about the committee's work and we think about that category of service and accessibility, you know, part of that can just come through education. And I'm thinking of like my silly show that I do with Frank and Mary, and having this conversation to be like, because we talk a lot about race, but we haven't talked about, you know, age-related crimes. Those happen as well. So I think it's really worth exploring at some point. Please respond here, but we could probably go deeper and really understand that.
I just wanted to mention two things. So one of the things that I would pay attention to is the police reform bill. Okay, so it's not in its final stages right now, but it's still being looked at. And one of the things in the police reform bill that they're really looking at is collecting data from the police departments and having a board that certifies and decertifies officers based on civil complaints, acts of discrimination, hate crimes, things like that. You know, so while yes, as you say, it would appear to the community that it's an internal process, but I can assure you, we're very professional in the way that we handle things, and we hold our people accountable. But additionally, there's a second mechanism that comes into play with the police reform bill. So I would urge people to, really look at it and browse through it. And again, it's something that's constantly in the works and constantly changing. And one last thing, civil rights violations. You could go on the Department of Justice, and they have a website that you can make a report, right? You can just put in your information. So if you feel that you've had an issue where a police officer treated you unjust, and you feel that the process internal, I would urge people to obviously file a complaint, but then also look for other resources outside.
Yeah, and I want to be clear, Mike, it's a sensitive subject, but I think we have to be honest about,
No, I know.
these
I agree.
conversations, and I know you welcome that, but I think about, even the statement you said earlier, like that we do have people that are not documented here. So I think, I'm like, if I were one of those people, no way, I would have to be in absolute desperate straits to come and report something because of everything else that it could impact on my life. And it's like, it's like, what are the lesser of my evils, so to speak, right? So I think the more we can, create, a friendly but obviously professional face of the police force, and that it's an accessible process, and that it's a fair process, and it's so important, because what goes unreported only perpetuates, all the negative, the violence and everything else we know.
Understood.
So thank you so much, Mike, and for everybody for your comments. I want to just put a piece of a thought in the parking lot for a future date. My parking lot that's really full, and we'll keep track of. And as we hone in on our goals and values and vision, it'll make it clearer what we use. But I just want to put in the parking lot, we've touched on it a couple of times. Is there some other role of a group? Should there be some kind of mechanism in the town of Westborough outside of law enforcement for gathering information about bias-based activity, responding to? It's a rhetorical question, kind of just putting it out there. Shelby has shared with us in the past something that Medford has. Natick has another group that responds to hate-based incidents of hate-based violence or harassment. I don't know that there's a role for that in Westborough or not, but I'm just going to put it in the parking lot given the conversation today. Make sense? All right. Out of respect for time, we are going to defer the language access conversation and the social media conversation to next month. But I will say this, if you read the communications plan that I shared with you, there has been a recommendation by the town leadership that we condense the social media accounts out there. And so what we need to do is designate one of us to be a poster to the town on behalf of the committee. So we'll talk about what that will look like next time. And we'll also talk about how to beef up our webpage, which Shelby has very graciously been bringing my attention back to.
That's good.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. It's great.
Kara, do you have any artists in the group that might be nice, even though it's like under the town of Westborough, but when we post even just a little like
logo
icon or logo or something for us? Let's think about that. I'm not creative enough to come up with that.
So at this point, I want to open it up for announcements, other parking lot items that you'd like to put on future agendas, and we'll just review the action steps that we're taking as a result of this meeting. So any announcements from you all? All right. I will make an announcement. Oh, I didn't find it. Sorry. Okay, there's going to be an event on March 31st, sponsored by Square One, which is the collaboration that happens between Youth and Family Services, the Rotary Club, Westborough Public Schools, and who am I missing, Shelby? I feel like I'm missing somebody critical.
Well, Youth and Family
Westborough Connects.
Services. Well,
Westborough
Westborough Connects. Yep.
We are sponsoring a panel. It'll be a group of young adult panelists who are Westborough High School alumni. They're going to be speaking about their experiences around mental health and accessing mental health resources. It is going to be awesome. Ryan will know some of the folks who are going to be there. It's hard to see this whole thing, but in their own words, stories of hope. It will be on Wednesday, March 31st, no registration required. It's going to be broadcast live on Westborough TV and recorded for future viewing. These are the names of the alumni: Connor, Kofi, Rebecca, and Prithi. I'll be moderating the panel. The whole program will be an hour. We'll be sharing resources. We're trying to destigmatize conversations about mental health. Our objective, share stories of hope. The young people who are the panelists said, that's a little cheesy. It's probably not the best for young people who are going through crud to be thinking about hopefulness, but maybe stories of perseverance is how they wanted me to reframe it, and empowering people to access resources. So please share this widely. I will share it out with you to share beyond this group. And then I sent you an email earlier about a forum that is happening in Norfolk County. I know it doesn't apply here, but I live in Norfolk County, which is how it came to my attention. And I just thought it was interesting that the DA is bringing together a bunch of local police chiefs to talk about the anti-Asian hate, violence, and how those different communities are responding. So just interesting to know of anything that might be happening like that around here. I've asked Chief Lori when he gets back from vacation, we'll hopefully touch base about that.
Kara, just want to remind everyone about Kindness Week coming up.
Yes, thank you.
God knows we need more kindness and joy in this world. So that starts Sunday, the 21st. You can go to Westborough, ughconnects.org for a full list of events. I know the library is sponsoring some, the police department is involved, the fire department, lots of community groups, the women's club. So lots of ways to participate. All events are free, and lots of ways where you can sort of tag on and spread your own kindness in your own ways, in your own little circles of the world. So, or your big circles of the world, I guess. So.
Anyone else have announcements, events, topics?
I'm curious, Ryan, how was the event? Just the Sunday's rally on the Common?
Yes. So for those of you who haven't heard of this past Saturday, I organized my first rally ever, and we had about 800 people show up from different backgrounds, all types of people and of all ages, just rallying against anti-Asian hate and violence. It was honestly really heartwarming and definitely a milestone in my life. So many people coming together in love and unity and solidarity, including students, teachers, like local business owners, elected representatives, and heads of community organizations, and even the volunteers and participants were of all colors and experiences. And I couldn't be any prouder of not just the Boston community, but the Massachusetts community for coming together and putting on this display of support and love. So that makes me, despite everything that's been happening, that makes me very hopeful for the future of Massachusetts and just our country in general. We concluded the rally with a march through Chinatown and through the Boston streets to the Massachusetts State House. And in doing so, we went through the Chinatown Gate. If you guys don't know, it's this beautiful monument. And we got to show like our allied members and allied communities. This is the people you're fighting for. These are the brothers and sisters you came out here to protect and support. And we want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts that you came out to stand by us in battling this terrible these terrible acts of violence and hate. And I wouldn't have been able to do it without the support of so many people. I had people I consulted for advice and guidance, but also help from elders from Chinatown who wanted to do everything because they were really inspired by just seeing young people like college-age kids like me and younger who came out in support of these elders. Wilson Lee, for example, from the Chinese American Heritage Foundation, came out and donated like 200 chasiu bao, which are these like Chinese pork buns, to attendees. And he also donated like hundreds of cardboard pieces and paint so people could make signs if they didn't have some. And we had kids there, grandparents, everyone. It was a multicolored rainbow of love and support, and I couldn't be any happier that that was put in place. Obviously, there's still so much that has to be done, as demonstrated by the events that occurred in Georgia. But just seeing people and knowing that there are people out there who care about this issue really warms my heart.
It's really inspiring.
Thank you.
All right, I think that's a nice, hopeful note to end on. The action steps are that Ryan and I are going to gather to draft a statement on behalf of us, Youth Commission, and a whole bunch of other folks, hopefully. And all of us are going to contribute to the resource list that we started gathering today, which we will post on the website. Those related to anti-Asian hate violence will include in the letter that we write. I'll send to you information about the events discussed today, and we'll add the topics we missed to the parking lot for future agendas. And I'm going to have a conversation with Kim Foster offline about, can we get training and or like a consultant to help us with our vision, values, goals stuff. Okay.
Could I add something that I forgot to add?
Yeah.
So from that rally, a group was born. We're called Stop Asian Hate. So if you Google Stop Asian Hate Boston, you'll find all the pics and videos from our rally. But we are also currently working to raise money for different local organizations and groups around Boston. We especially want to help businesses and organizations in Chinatown because they've been severely impacted by the COVID-19 crisis and they're struggling. If you Google just like Chinatown businesses, COVID-19 pandemic struggling, you'll find so many articles about and stories of different business owners just trying to live and get through this. And they've been really fighting tooth and bone to keep their businesses alive. So whether you could contribute to the cause or just share, we'd really appreciate it. That's all I had to say.
That's great. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.
Wait, you mean need a motion to adjourn?
Oh, shoot.
Sorry.
I know. I'm like the time. May I have a motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Shelby, a second.
Yes.
Sarah. Okay. Quick roll call vote. Rana.
Rappaport, yes.
Ema.
Ness, yes.
Daniel.
Arbor, yes.
Shelby.
Marshall, yes.
Sarah.
Connors, yes.
Ryan.
One, yes.
Mike.
Daniels, yes.
Presley, yes. All right. For real.
I
this
don't
time.
have to write all the names for the adjournment. Never do
Cut
it.
and paste from the